So welcome to this week's episode of Leadership Soundbites with RokoM, Michelle. And so this week the topic that we're gonna talk about is one that's actually near and dear to my heart, and I'll talk about why in a minute. It's the power of directionally correct. I'm going to start us off with a quote, and then I'll come back and explain a little bit more about why that's so near and dear to my heart. Okay, the quote's over here. It's better to make a decision with what you know and learn from it, as opposed to waiting to act. And the waiting to act piece is around waiting for things to be perfect, right? All the T's crossed and the I's dotted and everything else. So here's why this matters to me. And I don't know if anybody else can relate to it. Maybe you can, Roko. I am what I refer to as a recovering perfectionist. Okay. So for me, it went from basically checking myself to say, we're not doing audited financial statements, right? And if we're directionally correct, if we're trending in the right way, let's go for it. Let's see what we can learn after we at least start taking action. And so clearly there's passion, but that's why directionally correct. And I couldn't forget, I actually found a quote on that somebody else, that's their phrase too. So anyway, what's on your mind, Roko?
Well, when you first shared it with me, the first thing that popped in my head was perfect is the enemy of good. Mm-hmm. And, you know, part of our improvement methodology that we always talk about is, you know, rapid cycles of improvement. And if you were to wait for perfection, you would never get started, because it's all about those incremental changes that are going to improve, and those many incremental improvements add up to some big change at some point. But yeah, I was laughing when you said why it's important to you, because I thought, oh my gosh, this is why we get along so well. I'm at the opposite end of the pendulum, you know, because I've always just been, hey, if you got some direction, let's just go with it.
I know.
I've never been that perfectionist, never been the perfectionist. So
it's so funny, because I think back to you and I in the room, maybe people can relate to it. You would not have a plan. You would just be like, an idea, let's go. And I'm like, well, wait. Yeah. But I think there's so much value in letting go of, and it's control. It's letting go of the control that we think we have. And it's the illusion of control by trying to strive for perfection, or at least, actually, let me say that differently. It's the illusion of control that we're afraid of letting go as we try and have things perfect before we do anything, right?
Yeah. So here's my twist is, perfect to me is understanding the intent. So that's the direction. If I have clarity around the intent or the principles of what I'm doing, and I have all I need to know. I don't need to have the specifics or have it be so perfect that, you know, or have nothing ambiguous, right? I can maneuver through the cloud, if you will, as long as I have clarity on the intent and the principles.
It's interesting. Part of the clarity on the intent brings you back to the greatness video with David Marquette.
Yes.
That's about developing leadership competencies in your people, right? Is you give them intent.
Yes.
As long as they have intent, then to your point, we can do the thinking around that. One of the pieces in the article that I was, and maybe a book, actually, there's a blog post that talked about a book. I was so excited that something else was directionally correct. But when they were describing were basically PDSA cycles. So it's like, if you can get directionally correct on something, which means you've landed on what this thing is that you're going to try, you're going to learn through the journey of applying and doing it. And I think if you wait for perfect, my definition of perfect, which means I have all the answers, I know exactly what's going on, I'm going to say that we're basically lying to ourselves, because we don't know that perfect works until we experiment with it. And there's no silver bullet, right? And so it's this place that's not achievable. And how frustrated can you be when you fully baked, air quote, fully baked this thing, and then all of a sudden you're going to go experiment with it, and guess what? It doesn't work as intended.
Right. Or there were unintended, things that happen. I mean, we couldn't think of everything.
Exactly.
Right. So there's these unintended consequences that pop up. I was trying to remember back in the 80s. Oh, was it fifth? What was it? Not Fifth Discipline, because that's a movie, isn't it?
I don't know.
Is it? Yeah, the Fifth Discipline, I think is what it's called, the Fifth Discipline. But it's all about this scientific thinking around, you cannot think of everything.
Mm-mm.
So you have to just, again, with the intent, follow through on that, see what you learn and adjust accordingly. So to your point, mini cycles of PDCA until you get to the place where you want. And the reality is that our environment, people, things change so rapidly that you have to be able to adjust so that perfection actually moves, right? The needle moves depending on those changes that are occurring outside of your influence and outside of your control. So you always have, it's a moving target.
It's interesting you say that. And what comes to mind for me is modern day, right? I look at Chat GPT, the AI stuff that's going on, the explosion in technology and the learning. And if we're anchored in this place that it has to be perfect before we do anything, we're irrelevant in a nanosecond.
Yeah.
And I think that's it, is you miss that opportunity of the learning and the growth and the, still being in the game, right? So if you think about leadership and the changes that we're making so quickly, to your point, we need to get out of our own way by at least saying, you know what? And that's where directionally correct came from me. If I'm directionally correct, if we're directionally correct, then our next step is to take action.
Yeah.
And then the additional learning happens from that. And I'm going to give this to everyone. It's freaking scary when you go to pull the trigger on something that you're going, especially if it's like enterprise wide or there's a lot of visibility to it. But it's also very powerful for people to see leaders take the risk and do the experiment when it's not all planned out and understand the learning.
Yeah. And I think there's levels of it, right? Levels of it in the sense of, just like when we talk about A3 thinking, you're not going to do it when the house is on fire, right? You have to pick it. There's levels of it. But when you were talking, what was coming to mind, do you remember that exercise we did with the spaghetti and the marshmallow?
Oh, yeah.
And it was how you could build the tallest tower, and the marshmallow had to be, suspended at the top. Yeah. In that, the person who did the TED Talk on it, and I apologize, I can't remember your name.
I can't either, but yeah.
It was a man, but he had done this analysis and had looked at, kindergartners, college graduates, executives, C-suite people in business, architects, all these different things. And it was the kindergartners who, to your point, directionally correct, right? The directionally correct was build a structure that can have a marshmallow at the top, as tall as you can be. That's all they needed to know. And then they started experimenting. All the other people, all the other groups had to plan and, oh, what if we did this? And, oh, that might not work. The judgment and the biases start to, filter in. But it was that unencumbered mind of just, hey, all we need to know is what's directionally correct, and we're just going to start experimenting.
Well, and it's so funny because the other thing that comes to mind for me when you said that was the other part of the story is the kindergartners just went in and started experimenting. Yeah. There wasn't a debate about who's going to do what. And one of the comments was, the kindergartners weren't debating about who's going to be CEO of the Marshmallow Tower, right?
Right.
Literally just got in and started doing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And when you just go in and start doing stuff and don't worry about who's going to be the leader or the boss, we learn from each other.
Yeah.
It's the whole idea of brainstorming, and a crazy idea gets thrown out there, and then you're going, and then you start building on that. And it's this leapfrog effect.
Yes.
Right. So I have to agree, it's that combination of intent and directionally correct and the bias toward learning and experimenting, instead of this is the one answer that's going to solve all this stuff. And you block yourself into any further thinking or learning when that happens.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you a question just because of what you were sharing about your personal story with it.
Yeah.
If I'm a leader and I'm like you, but I'm not recovering yet from perfectionism. I'm still that perfectionist.
I don't even
know
that
perfectionist. I'm that leader. What advice can you give me to help me shift my mind, right? To get me to that point of, I just need to be directionally correct. What's the advice?
I'm gonna go back to the thing that I share with people all the time, right? Is create awareness first that perfection is not a strength, because we tell ourselves it is. And so once we create that awareness, and again, awareness is the first step in recovery, right? Then we can start figuring out, how do we back away from that? And after a while, it gets okay. And I have phrases like, we're not doing audited financial statements, right? Because I was in finance for so long. I did that to where I told myself that, because there are certain things that you literally have to find the penny. Okay.
Yeah.
That's not everything.
Yeah.
And that's not most things. And so I had to remind myself of that. But I think the first step for anything, Roko, is to create awareness that where we are today is not where we need to be. And the things that we consider strengths, that we wear it like a badge of honor.
Yeah.
A lot of times. To recognize that perfectionism is not a strength. If anything, it's your Achilles heel.
I love that. I love that. So I have one more question now, because you prompted my mind when you were saying that. What was going through my mind is, well, how do I bring awareness to it? So what would resistance to directionally correct sound like if I'm a leader who is unaware of my perfectionism?
My where my brain went initially when you said that is, it's all the things that can go wrong with not having everything planned out right. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so if that's my initial reaction to someone experimenting, in fact, I was on a call with somebody recently that it was around talking about this, basically building this framework, structure, plan, outline right for this thing, to be able to do this. And it was around change management. And what I said is you can build this plan, but we need to be able to meet people where they're at. And we need to be able to create pull. And so, if I have someone come to me and say, hey, I've got a team, because to me, it's about creating pull for whatever it is we're developing. Don't force it, do top down. Right. And so if I have someone come to me and say, hey, I've got an hour that you can spend with my team to do change management education, I'm going to say, great. Because my word for this year is yes, by the way.
I love it.
I'm going to say yes. So let's figure out what we can do. Right. But the reaction of this other person I was talking to is, you could see the look on her face. There's no way we can do that in an hour. I'm like, in my head, it's like we're planting seeds. And we can plant a lot of seeds in 60 minutes.
Yeah. So
people start creating different interactions with the people that they interact with. Heck yes, we're going to do 60 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that your mind has shifted to that. Well, what can we do? What can we do? Because I remember having a conversation with you at some time, and you were about classes and the size it had to be, and you were like, no, we can't do it. I'm like, well, what's possible? What is that minimum threshold, and how do we know that threshold? But again, going back to what does it sound like? So what I heard was, there might be resistance in saying, well, what about this detail? And what about this detail? And what about this detail? So that might be what it sounds like.
Exactly. And it can't happen that way, or that's not how it's air quotes supposed to be.
Or supposed to be.
Because that's the other thing that comes to mind for me is that when you take me back to that time, and I remember that freaking conversation as we're driving down the road, like, I don't know how many years ago. But it was one of those things is in my head was the rule, because I'm a rule follower too, right? And so I think that's where the perfection, rule follower, all this stuff that we trap ourselves, right? And it's almost like a straitjacket that you're in. You confine yourself so much that you can't move forward and do stuff.
Yes.
But the rules is we had to have this, this, and this. And that's drove me. And I'm like, we need to actually parking lot those rules, right? And figure out, and I'll go the other way that I did with John Maxwell team, or some quote that I heard associated with one of the things that I went to is do for one what you wish you could do for many. And I had a conversation like that with Catalysis, because I'm going to be doing a workshop for them in Chicago, right, for the summit that's coming up. And there was a thing about registration initially early on. And it's like, Michelle, how many people do you actually need to have a productive workshop? And I looked at her and I said, do for one what you wish you could do for many. And I said, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It can be 1, it can be 50.
Because you can adjust.
Exactly. And so that is the beauty, I think, of, to your point, intentionally direct intent, to where if the intent is to be in service to people and to develop them, one's good.
Yeah.
One's good. So the breakouts are going to be between me and the person in the room. Right?
There you go.
But there's more than one people who are listening.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But the thing is you could only have 2. You could only have 1. You could have 10. If the intent is to develop, or the intent is to experiment and learn, or the intent is to get to a countermeasure, start, do, say yes.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
So anyway, I love this time in the room with you. So thank you.
Me too.
So what's 1 or 2 things you want people to walk away with around the power of directionally correct?
Ooh, so there's so many things. For me, it's the mind shift of going from the rules, as you called it, to intent. And if you can have awareness to when you're stuck on the rules and find a way to shift yourself to intent, then you'll be moving forward. The recovering perfectionist.
Yes, I know. Well, that's me. I'm a recovering perfectionist, and I can spot them a mile away because I am one. But I am a recovering perfectionist. I think for me is, and it goes back to the question you asked, Roko, on how would you know? I think it's to set the intention for yourself, to pay attention to how you react and respond to certain things that may not seem fully baked, right? And in your head, you may be saying something along the lines of, the plan's not done yet, or they're not done with the plan. And notice that, because if that's the case, you could be in the same boat that I'm in, to where you have an opportunity to go, you know what? It doesn't need to be fully baked, because we're going to learn so much by just going to action, experimenting. And to your point, Roko, we're not talking about things that are going to endanger people or anything else like that, but there's so many things that we can do that by doing it, we're going to learn and iterate on that stuff. And we engage people in that process too. We don't hold them off. They're in there doing, experimenting, whatever it may be. In fact, my 3-year-old grandson's great at directionally correct. Not the 6-year-old, but the 3-year-old is. So I think that's it. Pay attention to your own reactions to things that aren't fully baked. And then figure out where the opportunity exists to just be directionally correct and continue learning. So there is power in it.
That's right. There is. I'm so glad you came up with this topic.
Yeah, I do like it. It's a phrase I use all the time. So I thought, and it's a real thing. Who knew? All right. Well, I appreciate this time as always. Until next time, this is RokoM Michele with Leadership Soundbites on the power of being directionally correct. Please like, share, subscribe. Thank you.
Bye.